Our guest today is the Executive Director of the Illinois Housing Development Authority. She was appointed to this position by Governor Patrick Quinn 3.5 years ago. Prior to this appointment, our guest today served as the authority's general counsel and acted as Assistant Executive Director. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree in Finance from DePaul University and her law degree from Loyola. Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Director of the Illinois Housing Finance Authority, Development Authority, Mary Kenney. Mary?
Thanks, Jay. Before I get started, there was a couple of people that I wanted to recognize myself. We've had some kind of rough times in the housing market lately, and I know it's a kind of fair game to pick on state employees from time to time, but IDA has some of the best staff really in the business, and I can say that unequivocally, working nights and weekends and just overtime during the housing crisis. And so I really want to acknowledge the two tables that are sitting there. If you guys can stand up, stand up. Some of the most committed people you'll really ever come across. In addition to that, I have a board member here today as well. Anyone who in the mortgage lending business knows that it's been kind of rough waters, and our board, again, uncompensated public servants that have really just given the time to really guide our agency through a difficult time. Harlan Karp. Thanks, Harlan. On a personal note, Jay recognized Bridget Gaynor, who I'm blessed to call a friend as well, but I have a group of fabulous women, Kathy Stein, Lucy Moe, Katie Sabo, that whole table of women. If we could transport them to Washington, we could solve a lot of the world's problems. So thanks for being here today. Jay also recognized my in-laws, Susan and Lou Manilow, who are here today, who are just really two pillars of the community here in Chicago, have done so much to advance the arts and philanthropy. Thank you both for being here today. Also, I have my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, John's place, Mr. John Manilow, very big among the 8-year-olds in the city, and his beautiful wife, Lynn. And finally, the love of my life and the creative genius, David Manilow, creator of Check Please, my husband. 6 cities, but it started right here in Chicago. I asked my 9-year-old, Nate Manilow, who's one of our only children here still in the city, if he wanted to come today, and he said that speeches are boring and he did not want to hear about tax credits. I'm not kidding. So it might be my first sign I've been working a little too hard. Okay. Well, the last time I was here in early 2012, there wasn't a lot of bright spots in the housing market. The market was still reeling from the onslaught of foreclosures, property values were declining, and the country was grappling with how to help homeowners who owed more on their homes than their homes were worth. At that time, homeowners had lost an estimated $7 trillion in equity. Today, the news is markedly different. The number of foreclosures in Illinois have fallen for the 11th straight month. The number of completed foreclosures for the past year has dropped by close to 70%. Home values have finally begun to climb, and the number of homeowners who are underwater are also on the decline. Indeed, for some, the market has already recovered. Prices are approaching their pre-crash levels. The for sale signs have disappeared, and the 3 or 4 vacant homes in the neighborhood are now occupied. We hear stories of bidding wars in Lincoln Park, but there are whole swaths of the city and state that seem to have been passed over, areas where the foreclosures persist and the vacancies are still at record levels. Entire communities are feeling disenfranchised. In many ways, it really is a tale of two cities. As the executive director of the state's housing finance agency, I've had a front row seat to the crisis. I have watched with despair as families have struggled to save their homes, crushed by the economic downturn that had taken their jobs and often their dignity. And I've heard the commentary and analysis focusing on the crash and its causes as well as the aftermath. There's no doubt that the housing crisis left too many stories of devastation in its wake. But what I have found is that a good number of these stories were already underway long before the housing crash hit. Illinois resident Regina Bailey is one of those stories. When her husband returned from the service more than 25 years ago, the young couple purchased a home in the Austin neighborhood of Chicago. It was there that the couple began their family and raised their children, and are now raising a granddaughter. And it is the same home Regina almost lost to a series of misfortunes that started when her son died of leukemia at age 24. The grief was too much for her, and her husband became the family's sole financial supporter, working hard to pay off their son's medical bills until he, too, became ill and passed away. Regina did find a job after his death, but was one of the first to lose it when the recession hit. She had built her life in this home, yet now, out of work and behind on her payments, she faced the possibility of losing it. Until the state's foreclosure prevention network connected her to mortgage payment assistance through the Illinois Hardest Hit program, which is a program that my agency administers. Today, Regina is back to work as a medical recorder and is still living with her granddaughter in their home in Austin, where they belong. She's grateful for the assistance she received. It literally bought her time to get back on her feet. It would be easy to write off Regina's story as just another family affected by the crisis, whose fate will rise as the crisis subsides. But if you look closer, you can see that the events leading to her family's financial distress were set in motion long before the crash, and Regina's story is not unique. When I became the executive director of IDA in 2011, one of the first things we did was to launch a loan modification program for our own borrowers. Eligibility was based on hardship, which we defined as job loss. Over time, as we looked at the program and the customers that were being denied, we decided we had to expand the definition of hardship. Job loss was too restrictive, as many families were still working, but they were working at substantially reduced amounts. Others had fallen behind as a result of medical expenses. And like Regina, many of these events had taken place long before the crisis took hold. The reality is that many families were teetering long before the crash, and the recent housing crisis will only serve to exacerbate this instability. For low and moderate income families, the equity they have in their home is often the only wealth they have. This presents a real problem when you consider that over 200,000 Illinois families have lost their homes since the crisis began. And for those lucky enough to still own a home, the drop in home values has wiped out a large portion of that equity. For renters, the news is worse. Statistics show that most renters have little wealth of any kind, and the recent jump in rents isn't likely to help. Most of you know that IDA's primary focus is to provide more affordable housing options to low and moderate income households, whether it's helping a fireman or a teacher buy their first home so they can live in the neighborhood where they work, or providing an affordable rental option for a senior living on a fixed income who no longer needs or wants the home where they raise their family, but still wants to be part of that community. Or whether it's helping someone who's disabled live independently within their community. The need for more affordable housing has never been greater. The foreclosure crisis has pushed more families into the rental market, forcing rents to their highest level in years, while on the single-family side, it is harder than ever to get a mortgage. Real incomes have declined, and more families and seniors live at or below the poverty line. And these families have children. A bipartisan advocacy group recently found that the number of homeless children in public schools has jumped 72% since the housing crisis began. Think about that. The homeless children in our public schools has jumped by 72%. For most, actually all of IDA's history, we've been committed to providing new opportunities for affordable housing in Illinois. That includes affordable financing for first-time home buyers and the creation of more affordable rental units. The past 5 years have been quite unique. As the state's housing finance agency, our focus shifted from financing new units to stemming the flow of families being displaced. The sheer number of people affected was overwhelming. At the height of the crisis, over 115,000 families were in some state of foreclosure. The state had launched a number of programs that were designed to help people affected by the downturn. The Department of Employment Security was providing unemployment funds and job placement services. My agency was providing homeownership counseling and foreclosure mediation, as well as financial assistance to eligible homeowners. The Department of Financial and Professional Regulation was working hard to raise awareness and uncover mortgage fraud. Various offices made free legal assistance available. Governor Quinn was frustrated. He saw the state's resources as too disjointed and not accessible. And even worse, struggling families were falling victim to record incidents of mortgage fraud. The problem was that various programs were under the jurisdiction of different departments, and the public was not always aware of their existence or how to access them. He demanded a comprehensive solution. That solution came in the form of the Illinois Foreclosure Prevention Network. The network brought all of the state's agencies and programs under one umbrella, supported by a website and a hotline hosted by my agency. The network acts as a one-stop shop for homeowners facing foreclosure, providing free counseling, legal assistance, and even financial assistance. With all the resources in one place, we've been able to publicize the network through a marketing campaign directly targeting residents in areas that need them. And by working with the Department of Employment Security, we've been able to directly target residents that were receiving unemployment assistance, the homeowners that needed our help the most. We also were able to target advertising through billboards and radio in areas hardest hit in the state and city. The network has become the go-to place for homeowners in trouble. In just 18 months, over 1 million families have accessed information through the network's events, website, and hotline. Over 100,000 families have received one-on-one counseling, and almost $270 million in financial assistance has been committed, helping over 10,000 families keep their homes. There's still work to do, but great progress has been made, as evidenced by the steep decline in foreclosures over the past year. While helping families to stay in their homes was a top priority, we knew we also needed a plan to bring more liquidity to the mortgage market. While many families were looking to buy homes, home mortgages were not easy to obtain. Larger down payments were being required, and banks had raised their credit requirements so much that many families could not qualify. Credit scores rose from an average of 620 to over 750, and some lenders simply exited the mortgage market altogether. The home ownership rate in the U.S. has fallen for its 8th straight year. And these graphs really tell the story. If you look at these graphs, you can see that the home ownership rate for homeowners between the ages of 25 and 34 is the steep decline in that number. It's actually the lowest number on record. And then if you look at the opposing graph of 65 and over, the rate of home ownership among that group, it's actually the highest on record. So, I mean, that really tells the story. Young Americans couldn't buy a home, and older Americans couldn't sell the home that they were looking to leave. The market was stuck, and without needed liquidity, the number of buyers could not offset the excess supply of homes on the market. In addition, we knew that a healthy housing market would be key to the state's economic recovery. Historically, housing construction and rehabilitation has contributed 4.5% to the nation's GDP. Since 2008, that number has been about half that. The excess supply of homes had basically pushed housing starts to a record low. My agency did a number of things to help expand credit and support the market. First, we eliminated our program's first-time home buyer requirement, so homeowners seeking their second or even third home would have access to the capital they need. Then we introduced a number of new mortgage products that provided below-market interest rates, lower credit requirements, a mortgage interest tax credit, and down payment assistance. And I know there's probably some of you in the audience that are thinking like, wow, isn't this what got us into the crisis in the first place? And the answer to that question is no. I have heard affordable housing be used as like a scapegoat in terms of this housing crisis like way too many times. It really upsets me to hear people say that. My agency did lending to middle-class families that couldn't scrape together a down payment or maybe stretching to get that payment. And it was at the level that they were even paying rent. These folks could afford these mortgages, a 30-year fixed rate with homeownership counseling. We've been doing it for close to 30 years, and our default rate was less than 2%. So anybody who tells you that the affordable home ownership was part of the cause of the crisis in the United States, they're just not telling the truth. The numbers don't back that up. And there's other reasons that I could talk about all day for why I think people want to promote that story, but it's simply not true. And my agency has a 30-year record that I'd be happy to share with you to show you the fallacy in that. The net effect of all of these programs was an increase in our loan reservations from $50 million in 2010 to a projected $400 million this year. And these numbers really only tell half the story, because at the same time that we were trying to fill this void in the market, the financial markets were still in a state of upheaval. Our traditional source of funding, the bond market, was not available. So we needed to find a new source of capital to provide cash at an affordable rate to potential homeowners. We completely transformed our business model, shifting our loan products from a privately insured whole loan to a mortgage-backed security. And on the funding side, we abandoned the municipal market for the mortgage trade desk, attracting a completely different pool of investors. This new model has given us new executions on the financing side and helped us to reach many good buyers that might not otherwise have been able to obtain a mortgage. And the market is recovering. Home sales have increased by almost 9% over the past year, and home values, after years of decline, are up almost 7%. As I mentioned earlier, the recovery has been uneven. Certain parts of the state and city are flourishing, while others seem to be left behind, with vacancy rates in some parts of the city, such as the south and west sides, as high as 30%, and more than 20% in some of our south suburbs. Think about that. That's 1 in every 5 homes that you pass that's either abandoned or foreclosed. Governor Quinn was distressed by what he saw in many communities. He wanted to know how we could help these areas recover more quickly and prevent further deterioration in our neighborhoods. We recognized that part of the problem was that properties were spending too long in the foreclosure process, and often these properties had already been abandoned by the families that lived there. We championed a solution in Springfield, and earlier this spring, Governor Quinn signed a bill that fast-tracked foreclosures on properties that were vacant, reducing the time required for a bank to take possession and sell the property. And with help from the state and federal government, we undertook a number of programs targeted to specific communities hard hit by foreclosures. To date, we've financed the acquisition and rehabilitation of over 2,700 vacant units across the state, and an additional 900 or so that are in process. In addition to that, we launched a home buyer initiative that provides up to $10,000 in down payment assistance for buyers willing to purchase vacant properties in 5 targeted communities. Earlier this year, the program was expanded to 15 communities, and to date, over 530 vacant homes have been purchased, providing not just affordable home ownership, but at the same time, bringing properties back to productive use. And just this month, we launched the state's Abandoned Property Fund, a new program that will help municipalities and local governments deal with vacant properties in their communities. The process will be long, no doubt, but I can honestly say that there is no state in the union that has done more to support communities and rebuild. Given the increase of families in the rental market, we're also focused on maximizing our resources to develop more rental units, especially in those areas hard hit by foreclosure. Since its creation in 1967, IDA has financed over 225,000 units of affordable rental housing, creating new rental options in 1,800 separate developments in every county of the state. From downtown Chicago all the way down to Metropolis, way down south, the developments we finance provide affordable options for families and seniors while often spurring redevelopment and investment in the areas around them. In fact, in one way or another, my agency is responsible for more than 7% of all the rental units in Illinois, which is 1 out of 14 apartments, and quite remarkable when you think about it. And all of this is done by partnering with private developers. We lend at low rates of interest, or in some cases, no interest, and in exchange, the developer agrees to lease some or all of the development's units to low and moderate income tenants who are allowed to pay a reduced rent. Behind me, you can see some examples of some of the developments that we financed. Randolph Towers is actually in the theater district, which my in-laws are responsible for. Right across the street, actually, from the Oriental, I think. This was a 1929 landmark, the Steuben Club in Chicago, under scaffolding for 10 years. A lot of you may have walked past it on Wells Street, which had its grand opening this year. About 311 units, about 60 of which are affordable. So a great example of some of the work that my agency does. We financed about $90 million of a $140 million construction budget. And then there's Lexington Farms. This is the first LEED Platinum development. It's single-family rental down in Jerseyville, about 80 miles outside of Springfield, providing affordable housing. And finally, Haven House, which is 14 units of supportive housing in Massac County, the first supportive housing in that entire area. So for people with disabilities, there weren't really a lot of options within the community prior to the development of Haven House. Since Governor Quinn took office, IDA's financed over 26,000 units of housing across the state. And this development not only provides affordable housing, it often helps to stabilize neighborhoods and acts as an economic engine for the state. Since 2009, IDA's lending activities have generated almost 15,000 full-time jobs, $126 million in tax revenue, and over $1 billion in local business income. The past few years have been years of tremendous change, and my agency has been no exception. Our business models, methods of financing, and role in the state have completely changed. And while in the past we functioned behind the scenes, we are now an agency that interacts directly with the people and communities we serve. Despite all of this, I believe that we are much stronger today than we were 10 years ago. IDA has emerged from the crisis with over $2 billion in assets, a strong balance sheet, a high level of profitability, and is more operationally efficient than ever before. In fact, I'm happy to report that IDA is one of the few financial institutions in the country who actually received an upgrade this year. In August, S&P raised IDA's issuer credit rating from an A+ to a AA-. And I would love to take credit for that. Is my CFO here? Hazim Taib is our CFO, and has really done just an amazing job. He's one of those rare people that really can turn lemons into lemonade, because it has been a very difficult time, as anyone in the banking industry can tell you, and he's done a really fabulous job of guiding us through what has been a very difficult time, not just for Illinois, but for our agency, and I thank you for that, Hazim. There's an old saying that the pessimist curses the wind, the optimist prays for it to change, and the realist adjusts its sails. I believe that my agency has successfully weathered a pretty intense storm, but it is well positioned to serve our state and its residents in a more comprehensive way, while at the same time adding to the state's overall economic prosperity. And we do this at absolutely no cost to the state. We're not supported by tax dollars, our employees are not state employees, and our debts are not debts of the state. IDA is basically a public bank that leverages its own balance sheet and other resources, not for shareholders, but to serve the public good. In fact, if IDA were chartered, it would be the 15th largest bank in Illinois. But I would not be telling the full story if I did not acknowledge the crucial role the federal government plays in our ability to serve this function. So much of what we do is accomplished through the support of the federal government. Of the 26,000 new rental units I referenced earlier, over 11,000 were made possible by the use of the federal low-income housing tax credit. And while my agency works to increase opportunities for new homeowners, none of that would be possible without a robust secondary mortgage market. And yet at a time when the need appears to be greater than ever, Congress finds itself debating whether this support should exist at all. Programs that act as a safety net for the most vulnerable among us, like food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit, are under attack. And the programs and resources that have proved essential in helping the middle class to achieve its dreams, like the student loan program, which has helped so many people go to college, including myself. I definitely would not be standing here today without the student loan program. Or programs, the support that's provided by Freddie and Fannie for middle class folks that are trying to achieve home ownership. Later this month, actually as we speak, I think, Congress is debating the future of these entities. The stakes are high, and what comes out of that debate may change the landscape for the middle class for generations to come. The need for reform at Fannie and Freddie is indisputable, but it is also indisputable that the secondary mortgage market was a robust and high-functioning market that made home ownership affordable for over 70 years. It wasn't until Wall Street learned to game the system, that the market became tainted. And the debate on tax reform has placed many programs like the low-income housing tax credit squarely on the table. This, despite the fact that it has proved to be the most successful housing program in our nation's history and perhaps the world, creating over 100,000 units of affordable housing each year with a default rate of less than 1%. In Illinois, we've created close to 75,000 new units of affordable rental housing through the tax credit, often in areas that would have no investment in rental housing at all. It has leveraged over $3 billion in private equity and created over 87,000 jobs. But it's not about jobs and investment. It's not even about housing, really. It's about people. I started today by sharing Regina's story with you because I think too often we get so caught up in the statistics and numbers that we forget that it's about people. We forget what it means to have a home. Too often, those of us who are more fortunate, I think, take all of that for granted. It's so fundamental, really, and it's why I think the work of many of the people in this room is nothing short of miraculous. I believe that creating safe and affordable housing in prospering communities changes lives. And I believe it is the most important thing we can do as a society. And I know to some of you that probably sounds crazy. And it's not that I believe that access to health care or education is not important. It's just that I have seen firsthand the effect that housing can have upon a person's life. It's transformative. And I've seen firsthand how that single thing can lead not just to a better and safer place to live, but a better job, better health care, better education, and yes, even better nutrition. I wish I could show you the effects of safe, affordable housing in stable communities. I'd like to show you the senior who lived and worked in Orland Park his whole life, only to face leaving it when he retired. Or the homeless vet in West Garfield Park who's working to rebuild his life with the support of social services and job training. Or the family that escaped a rough neighborhood in Inglewood to buy their first home in Chicago Heights. Or the man in Springfield who is finally living outside an institution and getting the services he needs right there in his community. Housing matters, and whether you know it or not, the debate is on in Washington, and there aren't any high-paid lobbyists that will host big-ticket fundraisers to make the case for lower-income folks or even the middle class. There's just people like us, and I hope that in the coming months, as the debate in Washington begins, you will become a part of that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's very refreshing to hear about a program of government that's working well. And you can tell your son that seeing Illinois and credit rating upgrade in the same article is definitely not boring. We're looking for questions now. I'm a poor substitute for Paul Green, but every so often he does have a day job at Roosevelt University that he has to show up for. So we'll start off. Teresa Garati, did I say that correctly? Newman Family Services. Can you please tell us about how IDA's supporting Governor Quinn's rebalancing initiative throughout the state?
Oh, thank you so much for that question. Because actually I had talked a bit about that in my first draft of my speech, because it's really an important initiative that the governor has taken on. And I have to say this, and I'm saying it from the heart. I've worked in housing my whole life. I'm not a political person. You know, Governor Quinn has really brought together, I mean, when I talked about the Foreclosure Prevention Network, to some of you that don't work in government, it sounds like a little thing, like you bring all these agencies together and they just work nicely. But it doesn't happen that way in real life. And you really have to force entities that, you know, don't have their own silos and regulations to kind of work together to accomplish something like that. And the leadership in Springfield has been really dominant in forcing departments to work together. And this is another example because Illinois really had one of the worst records of all of the states in the union in terms of how it provides services to the disabled. I mean, we were like 49th of 50 or something. And this was a huge, important initiative for Governor Quinn, and he brought together the Department of Human Services, my agency, the Department of Public Health, I'm missing some, but a lot of different agencies to work together. And we've made just a ton of progress on this issue in the last 3 years. He's had the political courage to close institutions. We've transferred over 2,000 people out of institutions and into community-based settings. He's the first governor in our history that actually committed capital dollars to the construction of supportive housing. And my agency's been the beneficiary of some of those dollars. We've actually doubled the number of units that we produce for supportive housing. So, just to go back to how I ended this speech, we had folks in Illinois who were 24 years old and were in a wheelchair, and for no other reason than that, were living in a nursing home. And that's just not the way that it should be. And so I'm very happy to be part of Governor Quinn's initiative on that point, and I'm really proud of the work that we've all done and under his leadership. Thanks for your question.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before you-